Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 68. Is it 68?
No, it's 7.
Oh, no.
It's 67. 67. Here we go. Here we go again here on the We Are Family Pittsburgh Sports Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate it. And go check out the episode we had last time with Austin Bechtold. That was a great time having Austin on. So make sure to check that out. But we have another great guest on today.
We're rolling with the guests.
With the guests. Kevin Gorman of the Trib, the Pirates beat writer for the Trib, joining us today. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us.
We always have to give a round of applause.
So I want to get right into it with you. So where did your passion for sports journalism really come from?
Oh, I mean, it started as a kid. I remember writing when the Trib, first started their, kind of the move toward digital. I remember writing that, that my column came to you from the ink-stained fingertips of a former paperboy. I'm a guy who delivered the Pittsburgh Press when I was a kid. So, we always had newspapers around the house. My dad was a Point Park journalism graduate. So he was very much a guy who read multiple newspapers a day. We always had sports on television. He was well versed in every sport. And I grew up in a household like that, where we watched everything from the Steelers, Penguins, Pirates to Pitt football and basketball to the Olympics, figure skating, boxing, you name it, we watched it. And so, but it wasn't just about watching sports. It was about talking about them, telling stories about them and sharing that passion as kind of a storyteller, even as a kid.
So could you explain a little bit how you got into journalism? Talk about, obviously, you were at one point at Point Park University, but talk about how you got into journalism and kind of the process of making your way up to the Trib and to what you do now.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short, but it's kind of a long, winding road. I started writing for the Baldwin High School student newspaper. It was called the Perbolite, and I did that my sophomore through senior years of high school. Was the sports editor my senior year, and got a Golden Key Society scholarship to Point Park, and I went there for 2 years. While I was at the Point Park, I was a commuter and a journalism major. There was both a bus strike and a newspaper strike. So it was a very tough time to be a student there, given that I had to get up and drive my mom and all of my neighbors to work and drop them off at their door and then go to class, and that there was no newspaper to read, let alone write for. So it was a very tough time. And so I started looking to go elsewhere, and I ended up transferring to Penn State. And I went to Penn State primarily for the chance to write for the Daily Collegian, their student newspaper, which published 5 days a week, plus they had a game day edition during football season. And so that was really my big break in terms of my career, that I got to cover sports at Penn State for the Daily Collegian, where I covered the 1994 Penn State football team that went undefeated, won the first Big Ten championship in school history, won the Rose Bowl, and had two Heisman Trophy Award finals. So I got to cover that ceremony as well as the Rose Bowl. And so that was really kind of the turning point for me in my career, that I knew that was my big opportunity to get some clips and have a chance to, try to get a job in the field. And I was able to get internships, first in the summer of '95 at the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee, and then the following summer at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix, Arizona, and followed by a fall internship at the Dallas Morning News. And then I got a 2-year internship at the Kansas City Star. And so I was there for about 7 months, and the Commercial Appeal called and offered me a full-time job. So I worked there for 18 months, and that was kind of a year and a half where I got a lot of great experience and have fond memories of Memphis as both a sports town and a town with great culture. But I dealt with a lot of death in that year. My father and grandmother both died. I lost one of my best childhood friends to a suicide, and another childhood friend died in a car accident. And then I had an uncle who died from cancer. And so it was very difficult to be away from my hometown. And so that's when I moved back. I quit my job in Memphis and moved back to Pittsburgh in May of '99. And I ended up getting a job at the Trib. And I started, I believe, right around Labor Day of 1999. I came over, I think it was like August 30th or something. But I've been at the Trib now for, I guess almost 27 years. So I've covered, kind of almost everything you can do in Pittsburgh in terms of covering high school and college and pro sports, covering Super Bowl, Stanley Cup finals, the Pirates in the playoffs, college NCAA basketball, bowl games. I've had a chance as well to do, the WPIL football and basketball championship games on television as both a sideline reporter and guest analyst or color analyst. And I've had a chance to work on a couple different radio stations, as a guest host or a fill-in host. And so kind of, in some ways it's everything I dreamed about. And in other ways it's a little bit beyond my wildest dreams because I never imagined I would do television or radio. But to be honest with you, writing and print is where my heart is. And so that's kind of my concentration. I just like to consider myself, kind of a multi-dimensional in terms of what I'm capable of doing and print focused in terms of what I love to do.
Were you going to say I have a question?
You good?
Yeah, so give us maybe one or two examples. Like, what is some of your favorite pieces you've written? I mean, obviously you've done a lot of Pirates work, but it can be anything. Like, what stands out to you in something you wrote and it was like, wow, that was a really good piece of journalism and I gave a lot of good opinion and or fact in that article?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about it is I'm sure there's stories that somebody else might point to and say, well, this was a good piece of reporting, or this was a story that, that really captured a game or captured a player in terms of a feature. The things that really resonate with me are the stories that I tell about people. And, I had a story. I've had a couple stories that won some awards. One was on a Pitt coach, Bob Junko, who was an assistant coach and one of their key recruiters. He went into sudden cardiac arrest at a golf outing, and all this confluence of events saved his life. And he shared that story with me, and that was one that won some awards. I had a boxer, Verquan Kimbrough, who was a U.S. amateur national champion, and covered him, as an amateur and as a professional. And, he started to really falter as a professional, despite having all the talent in the world. And he admitted that he was, what they call bulimic for boxing. Some people, it's called bulimia for sport, that he was making, gagging himself and making himself vomit to try to maintain his weight, to stay underweight for his boxing career and how it affected his career. He opened up and shared that story with me. I had more recently another guy who Ernie Withers, who's become a friend of mine just because I've written so many stories and he opened up and shared his stories. But he was the guy who was the fan that was shagging flies at Pirate City in the outfield, and he went into sudden cardiac arrest. And I wrote about the things that happened that saved his life and how he's now taken that as a post-retirement passion project is going out and raising money for AEDs that he's donating to firefighters and police departments and schools and businesses. That's become his thing, is making sure that the thing that saved his life is available to others. And in fact, he actually one time had to perform CPR on somebody because he was certified, and he had performed CPR and helped save someone else's life. That story continued to tell more stories. His wife got a free scan for some of the things he was involved in, and they found cancer in his wife, and that saved her life. Stories like that really resonate. I spent 10 years as a columnist for the Trib, and my favorite story I've ever written was about the first time I played catch with my son. And that's one, it's one of those things where, I remember writing this as a man, you want to become a father, and as a father, you want to have a son, and you want that son to be a ball player. And as much as I had hoped for my son to be a ball player and play baseball the way I did as a kid, it was more just a bonding moment between a father and a son while I was going through a divorce. So it was an emotional story. It was one that there were some lessons involved, and it was something that I didn't plan to write, but one that I sat down and wrote and kind of poured my soul into it. And that was one that really resonated with the readers. That was one somebody said to me when I wrote it, people are going to cut this out and have it hanging on the refrigerator. And I knew people who did. And that really meant the world to me. But to kind of wrap it up, there's a lot of stories. Some of my favorites because it wasn't just a Pittsburgh story, but it was a familiar Pittsburgh story to me and my family, was with Bill Mazeroski, who just died recently. And I had to rewrite his obituary, which was pre-written, but I had to kind of go in and add some stuff. But I've written several stories about Maz over the years, and I've always enjoyed talking with him. He was one of my childhood heroes because I had a cousin who was born the day that he hit the home run. So there was a family story that went along with that as well. And so, I think that's the thing. I think the human interest touch is what kind of has become part of my specialty, even though I very much focus on the Pirates now. But that's the stories that I love to tell. When somebody opens up and tells you their story and shares things with you that you have that nobody else has written about, and then people share those stories. Even more recently, when Mike McCarthy was hired as the Steelers coach, that was one that hit home because my dad's from Greenfield. I have family that's from Greenfield, cousins who still live there, and I have a cousin who coincidentally is married to Mike McCarthy's youngest sister. And so kind of know the McCarthy family a little bit, know a lot of stories about Mike McCarthy, which they all call him Michael. And so it was interesting to talk to people that knew him and to hear, I'm the guy that wrote about when, that Mike McCarthy was a bouncer at Donzi's nightclub and had to wear a tuxedo, and stories like that kind of really were Pittsburgh stories told about a Pittsburgher who's now coaching the Pittsburgh Steelers. So those sometimes are the ones that are fun. Those, off the top of my head, those are some of my favorite stories.
Could you maybe talk about the first time you interacted maybe with a professional athlete where you're almost, I wouldn't say starstruck, but you're like, wow, this is really cool I'm doing. Are there any stories maybe early on where it was kind of your first experience interacting with a professional athlete?
Boy, I don't know if it's the first experience, but the two come to mind as soon as you're asking that question. One was I was covering the Arizona Cardinals training camp in Flagstaff, Arizona. They would have go up there because it was a little cooler. They went from 110 to 80 degrees. I went up and asked Boomer Esiason if I could talk to him. I was doing a story on the quarterbacks. And, at this point, Boomer Esiason was at the twilight of his career, but he was still a very big name in sports. And I remember going up to him, I was like, oh, Boomer, do you have a second? He's like, who the hell are you? And I was like, oh, I'm Kevin Gorman from the Arizona Republic. And I remember him, saying, oh, sure, yeah, I can talk with you. And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, when you are connected to an organization like that, like a major metropolitan newspaper, it carries some weight. He didn't know who the heck I was, but as soon as I said I was from the Arizona Republic, he gave me the time of day. Another one was, and this is more of a funny story, when I was at the Dallas Morning News as an intern, they asked me to do an interview with Carl Lewis, the Olympic great. And he was doing a fundraiser, and I get to this restaurant, and they had a little area roped off for me to interview Carl Lewis. And this is one of the greatest Olympians of all time. And I brought my digital recorder. No, it wasn't even a digital recorder. It was a tape recorder. So it had a little cassette tape, a mini cassette about this big. And I had the cassette recorder. I had a little tie pin microphone that you plug into the recorder, and he could put it on his shirt. So, good, make sure you get good sound and everything. About 5 minutes into the interview, and I'm writing down everything he's saying, but I'm using the recorder as a backup. A couple minutes in, I realized that my recorder has stopped and the batteries are dead. Oh, and I remember thinking to myself, of all the things, such a rookie mistake to not check your batteries, first of all. And, now everything's digital. You don't have to worry about it. You have to plug it in to make sure it's charged. But back then you had to have fresh batteries. I didn't have any batteries on me to change it. And so I just kind of panicked, and I was like, he saw me look at it. He noticed what was going on. And he never said a word. He just slowed down and talked at what you call perfect notebook speed. And so he let me write. I had to handwrite the entire interview, which took a long time. And I was writing fast, and I was using shorthand, which is something I learned in high school. I took a shorthand class along with a typing class, two of the best classes I ever took in high school. But so I get back to the office, and I tell them what happened. And they're like, well, how'd you do with the note taking? I said, I did pretty good. I think I got everything. And they said, that's good because we want a Q&A. So they didn't even want me to write a story. They just wanted a straight Q&A. And I was like, man, if there was ever a bad time for that to happen, that was it. But yeah, there's a lot of interactions. I could tell you story after story, but those were two of the early ones that really stand out to me.
Could you talk a little bit about, because obviously we're all trying to get into the sports industry and everything and trying to make a career out of this. Do you have any advice for us and for anyone listening trying to get into sports journalism and everything? And you touched on this earlier. Talk about how you have to kind of in this digital era be versatile, where you're not just writing and everything. You got to appear on the radio, appear on a podcast like this one, and talk to people through that way as well.
I mean, the best advice I can give you is the advice that I've lived. Okay, I mean, I'm sure there's other advice you could take from a professor who's written a book about it, or somebody who teaches the philosophy of it. For me, the advice that I can share is that when I was in college, I read everything I could get my hands on, and it wasn't always sports related. I was just an avid reader. So if you want to write, you have to be able to read. I mean, you have to read a lot, and you want to be informed. And when I was a columnist, I used to say, they'd say what people say about opinions, that everyone has one. I'd say what I tried to make, what separated me was that it was an informed opinion, that there was reporting behind it, that there was research, there was reporting, there was reading, that there was studying the subject. I didn't just go right off the top of my head what I thought. I tried to find out and basically validate my thoughts. I tried to make sure that I talked to the people that were involved that I was going to be writing about and gave them a chance to tell their story and maybe their side of the story. And my dad used to always say, don't tell both sides of the story, tell all sides of the story. Sometimes you have to seek out more people and get more things. If you think you know everything, all you have to do is make one more phone call and find out that you don't. And so that's one piece of advice, is read as much as you can, be as informed as you possibly can. The other part of it is do it in practice. If you want to be a writer, get published, and get published whether you get paid for it or not. I'm a big believer that if I spend the time to write something for you, I deserve to get compensated for that. But when you're first starting out, the compensation is seeing your name in print, seeing your byline. Like, that's the best form of compensation. I don't advise people to work for free, but I do say do whatever it takes to get in print, and then you can start demanding a price, if you want, or at least start considering it a profession. But get published. If you want to be a writer, get published. Start doing writing work, and that's the best way to get into it. But the other part of it is be willing to kind of do everything and anything. I think there's a lot of people that they think of sports and they think of, okay, I'm in Pittsburgh, I want to cover the Steelers, I want to cover the Penguins, I want to cover the Pirates. I spent 10 years covering high school sports. I spent years covering things I knew nothing about. I went to a golf tournament, and the guy that was sending me there, told me all about the field and the venue and all these different things historically. And then he said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't know the difference between a birdie and a bogey. Like, you got to tell me about golf. I don't know anything." You have to be willing to learn as much as you possibly can, as fast as you can, to be able to cover these sports and to write about it with some sense of knowledge, have the background and a sense of knowledge, but also, some level of expertise at some point, that you have to become somebody who can understand what is being told to you and translate that to the people, that your audience that are reading it or hearing it, or watching it. So those are all things. But I mean, there's really kind of, and I, as much as I say this, when I was 26 years old, I scoffed at some of the assignments that I got. I was not happy about them. I felt like that was beneath me to have to go cover a fishing rodeo. And by fishing rodeo, I meant they stocked a pond with fish and had contests for kids to see who could catch the fastest fish and the biggest fish and the longest fish. And there was all kinds of things there, and I'm like, you seriously, that's what you want me to write about? Yeah, that's what you want me to write about. I was one time assigned to cover the opening day of trout season. And I don't know anything about fishing and why trout season is important, but I went out to North Park and stood in the pouring rain with a raincoat on, and there were two people out on a little fishing boat on North Park, and when they came in, I got the story of the day, which was about how they had this trophy that was about this big, and whoever caught the first fish got the trophy for the year and got bragging rights. It was a father and a son. I got to know that family and found out that the son that I was writing about ended up marrying a coworker's daughter, and got to know that family. They've become friends of mine. You never know. You know, if you're out there, it's not the assignment, it's what you make of the assignment. It's not the story, it's what you make of the, it's how good you make the story. And that's the challenge. You could say to me, I want you to go out and do man on the street interviews, and most people would groan. You never know. It could be fascinating. You could find really, really good stories that way. So I always treated it like that I had this opportunity to tell someone's story. And if they were willing to share that story, I was willing to listen, and I was willing to write that story and tell it and try to make it as interesting as possible. And so I kind of looked at that as that's the precious part of our job, is that we are given this platform, and and there's a gift involved, like kind of a God-given gift to be able to write and to be able to communicate and to be able to tell stories and share those stories with the public. You have to treat that with some level of respect and some level of care. You have to treat writing as if it's not just a job, but a craft and really a calling more than anything. I mean, there's times when Derek Shelton was fired, I had written the story, and I remember the poor guy that I said this to. We were in the press box until 1:15 on a Saturday night, so it's 1:15 a.m. and typically you're back in the ballpark by 10 a.m. on Sunday morning for the day game. And I remember asking Derek Shelton a question about something that happened, and how would you react to that? And I remember him saying, I don't know. And that's when I realized, okay, here's a guy who we know he's at the end of the line, and now he's out of answers. And so I stayed until 1:15 and wrote the Derek Shelton has been fired story days before he'd been fired. You just write it as kind of like a skeleton of a story, writing it and giving all the background. Here's what's happened in his career as a Pirates manager. Here's the highlights. Here's the lowlights. Here's why he's going to get fired. Everything. You write it and you have it ready for when it eventually happens. And good thing I did that on Saturday night. Good thing I updated it on Wednesday after the game and updated all of his records and everything. And then on Thursday, I was in the middle of Shenley Park when he got fired, 2 miles away from my car on a hike. And I had the whole story done. And all we really had to do was put in the day that he was fired, and the quote from the press release about what Bob Nutting said about it. But those are things that you have that comes with experience, to know to do that, to be ready for it, but also to treat it, that it wasn't just me, winging it and throwing that together. That's something that, because I had the foresight because I've covered guys getting fired before, I had the foresight to pre-write that story. I also had the good fortune that when I was stuck in the middle of the woods, that I didn't have to try to come up with that story. I mean, Dave Parker died last year. They announced it after the national anthem and before the first pitch. So I have to cover a game, and I'm there by myself, and my boss says, "Hey, we don't have a Dave Parker obituary written. Can you write one?" Those are things that happen in this business. Is that Bill Mazeroski died the day of the first spring training game on February. He died on February 20th, which is actually my birthday. But the first spring training game was February 21st. I'm getting ready to go to the ballpark, and all of a sudden, hey, Bill Mazeroski died. This is, one of the most important players in Pirates history. Not just because he's a Hall of Famer, not just because he has eight Gold Gloves, but because of the home run he hit. That ended I think a 35-year drought of championships for the city of Pittsburgh. And it's one of the most memorable, I would say it's one of the most memorable plays in baseball history, one of the most memorable plays in sports history. And he's a guy who did it for the Pittsburgh Pirates, the team that I was covering. We had an obituary written, but it needed to be updated. And I needed to interview people at the Pirates, both players and coaches. I went through all the old stories that I've written about Maz and found the absolute money quotes that I was looking for. But you're doing that all on a day when you also had to drive to Sarasota and cover a game. And, I had a feature story going that day too. And it was like, it turns into a crazy day. And so there is that part of it, is that, and it comes with the experience. It comes with having done this for 30 years now. I guess we're going on 31 years. 30 years is full-time, nonstop. But, those are some of the things that happen in this business. And that's why, when you have to be able to react in an instant and drop everything you're doing, whether you're in the middle of something or not, and write a story or rewrite a story, and knowing that you're capturing history as it happens, and that you want to treat something as significant as the death of a Pirates legend with all of the respect that it deserves.
So I want to get into baseball a little bit, transition just a little bit, because I know we're on a time crunch here a little bit. But what was your take on the Pirates in spring training? What were the vibes like? Because I think a lot of people think this could be a team that could compete to try to make the playoffs this season. Obviously, you talk about Skeens, but the additions that they brought in the offseason, you look at the pitching staff, there's a lot of optimism. What are your thoughts on the Pirates in spring training going into the season? Are the vibes and kind of the mood different than in seasons past? And is this a team to look out for in 2026?
Well, you gave me the perfect opportunity to plug. I think it's going to be on Saturday. The Trib is going to have a special baseball section, and so I just wrote a story kind of about this topic. So that'll be on TribLIVE.com on Saturday. Thank you. The vibes are always good at spring training. It's always with an air of optimism that teams come in with a fresh slate. They come in off a good off season. Most of the guys come in for the most part completely healthy. And so the vibes are always good, and it's a relaxed atmosphere. You're playing games that the regulars are playing every other day. So one day's a game day, one day's a work day that they might be out of there before the game even starts. And they go out and get their work in, and then they can go to the beach or do whatever they want to do, go golf. So the vibes, when people talk about the vibes, it wasn't that the vibes were different. It was that the level of confidence was different. That's the vibe I got. Is that this is a team that felt, maybe for the first time, that they felt they were legit. They felt like they have a chance to contend. It's not wishful thinking. And Paul Skeens says something about that, about like not faking it till you make it type of thing. Like this is, I think he made one start for the Pirates before going to the World Baseball Classic. And in that, after that start, I had a chance to talk with Paul for quite a bit, more than 10 minutes. And, one of the things I think that really struck him was that he went out there and the three new acquisitions were playing behind, were either in the lineup or playing behind him. He had Brandon Lau at second base. He had Ryan O'Hearn in right field. He had Marcell Ozuna playing DH. I think that the Pirates went out and signed. They addressed their weakness, first of all. They had the worst, power offense in Major League Baseball last year. They ranked last in the majors in home runs, RBIs, runs scored, slugging, and OPS. So this was a team that was deficient in that regard. It's also a team that gave Paul Skeens well below league average, like a run below league average in terms of run support. And so you have a guy who was a unanimous Cy Young Award winner and arguably the best pitcher in baseball. And I only use the word arguably because Tarek Skubal has won back-to-back Cy Youngs, and that Skeens would kind of concede, maybe going into the WBC, that Skeens would said Skubal's the best pitcher in baseball. I don't know that people feel that way anymore. I think people are going to say Paul Skeens is the best pitcher in baseball. It's arguable, but in this case, I think Paul Skeens proved that you want him on the mound in a knockout game or in a must-win game because he's proven it now, and I think that's a good vibe for the Pirates. Is that he went out there on a great stage like the WBC and performed at a high level and performed against an amazing Dominican Republic lineup. Yeah. That batting order was just a murderer's row, and Skeens held them to one run. The funny thing about covering spring training this year was that with the talk of the three new additions, with the talk of the Pirates having the number one and consensus number one prospect in baseball in Connor Griffin, that barely anybody was talking about Paul Skeens, who's probably one of the top 10 players in baseball. And like I said, arguably the best pitcher in baseball. So I find that compelling. I find that interesting that Connor Griffin's fate with whether he's going to make the opening day roster or not really dominated the conversation down there. And it wasn't just the Pirates beat writers. This was the national media came in to talk about Connor Griffin, to write about how this guy's going to be a superstar. And everything, he's shown us is that he's going to be. I mean, it's not just the physical tools that he's 6'4", 225, that he's a 5-tool talent who can, hit for average and for power, that he has speed on the bases, and he's, good glove in the field, and he's got a great arm. He checks off every box there, but he also has, kind of a startling humility about him, and kind of a southern charm about him as well. That he's a friendly guy, that he's easy to talk with, that he's not standoffish, at least not yet. But he's handled everything, all the attention that he's received. He's handled it with a grace that has amazed his veteran teammates. They're all just very impressed with him. So that's probably the biggest story of spring training, is that Connor Griffin has become the storyline of spring training, not just the Pirates, but of Major League Baseball. And it really wasn't until the WBC that people started talking about other stuff. People started talking about somebody else instead of just this 19-year-old kid who has a chance to become the first, top prospect since Ken Griffey Jr. in 1989 to make the opening day roster as a 19-year-old. Whether that happens or not doesn't necessarily mean that Connor Griffin is not going to, if he doesn't make the team, that's not the end of the world. There's a lot of great players that came up as 19-year-olds that were not on the opening day roster. Bryce Harper, Juan Soto, Adrian Beltre is a Hall of Famer. There's plenty of guys that came up as teenagers. The only issue is if Connor Griffin doesn't make his debut until after April 24th, he'll no longer be a teenager, so that conversation ends. But one more chance to plug that. I did a really long interview with him. I think it was like a 25-minute interview with Connor at Lecom Park while I was at spring training, and that Q&A will appear in full in that special section as well. So, but I mean, those are some of the storylines. I think the Pirates have a really good foundation with their starting pitching. I think their bullpen has improved, and I think their batting order is definitely deeper and has a lot more power in it. It's just a matter of whether the Pirates can do a couple things. One, are they going to provide run support when guys like Paul Skeens and Mitch Keller are on the mound? Because I think those two combined for something like 30 or 38 or so quality starts last year, they got terrible run support. Are they going to be able to get the best out of guys like Braxton Ashcraft and Bubba Chandler? Is their defense going to be good enough to support the pitching that they get? Because there's definitely, some deficiencies defensively that they were willing to take on in terms of making up for it with their bats. So there's, and the other part of, can they win the close games? Can they avoid the long losing streaks? Those are all questions that the Pirates must answer before we start talking about them as a contender, let alone a playoff team.
I kind of want to touch back on that whole, you talk about Connor Griffin, maybe the shortstop situation. Something that shocked me, and, maybe it's less shocking than we realize, I don't know. But with Alika Williams still surviving roster cuts, what do you think about that? I know Connor Griffin, outside of Connor Griffin, he's the only, at least I guess, MLB-ready true shortstop that the Pirates really have right now. What do you think about him still, surviving roster cuts despite not being on the 40-man? Do you think the Pirates are going to bring him back on the 40-man? Is he going to make the opening day roster, shocking all of us? What do you see kind of that going on?
Well, I think today's lineup is interesting with the Pirates against the Orioles. I think they have Jared Triolo at shortstop and Nick York at third base and Nick Gonzalez at second base. Sometimes when you see these lineups at the end of spring training, sometimes it's a last look for a guy. Let's see if Nick York can play third base. Let's see how Jared Triolo handles shortstop. Let's see if Nick Gonzalez, can be a guy who can move around and play multiple positions and one day play third, one day play short, one day play second. So there are decisions that are being made or have already been made, and they're giving guys one last look sometimes. That's based on past history of covering these teams. I'm not in Bradenton, so I don't really have an inside scoop on what's going on there right now in terms of those decisions. But I'll tell you this. Alika Williams, if he makes the team and Connor Griffin doesn't, it's not that Alika Williams made the team in place of Connor Griffin. That's not that you can make that connection, but it's not a fair assessment. If Alika Williams makes the team, it's because the Pirates don't have a backup shortstop and they want to start Connor Griffin in the minors. If you look at Connor Griffin's numbers, his batting average is low. His strikeouts, I think, to walks was something like 10-1. I know he got his first walk yesterday. you have to take into consideration that if Connor Griffin is not the starting shortstop, and I've been on record saying that he should be, I'd be willing to live with the early failures or the early shortcomings, that he's going to have to make adjustments to Major League pitching. He's going to strike out a lot early. He's going to have to make adjustments to the timing and different things, and not be up there guessing at pitches, but actually recognizing the sequencing and what they're trying to do with him, how they're going to attack him. But the Pirates, I don't know if in their history if they've ever had a shortstop with his combination of tools outside of O'Neal Cruz, but he was a guy who was error prone. But Connor Griffin has a chance to be really, really special. I've had people say to me, there's a good reason to start him in the minors, and that's because in April you're going to face the best pitching that the minors is going to offer you in the month of April, because you're going to have guys who didn't make the Major League roster that were painfully close. You're going to have top 100 prospects that are not quite ready, but are very, very talented guys, like Bubba Chandler last year, like Hunter Barco this year probably. And then you're going to have the quad A guys that are just maybe kind of a notch below Major League level, but are very, very good at that level. And it's going to give him a month to adjust to going from 21 games and maybe 25 total in Double A, counting the playoffs, to adjusting to Triple A pitching, having seen Major League pitching in the Grapefruit League games at spring training. So Alika Williams, if he makes the team, he's not making it ahead of Connor Griffin. He's making it ahead of whoever would be the middle infielder backup. And that's the thing you have to take into consideration, is that Alika Williams is probably best suited for that role of playing once or twice a week, being able to play second base, shortstop, or third base, giving you professional at-bats, because he's done that very good job of that this spring. People say he can't hit, but he's hit well this spring. He looks like he's a different player at the plate. And he's capable of being able to perform when called upon once or twice a week. It could be that the Pirates opt to go with Jared Triola, which, talent evaluators have told me he's the best shortstop on the Pirates right now. But he's also your starting third baseman. So that's why maybe Gonzalez, Williams, York could be getting a look, Tyler Callahan. They could all be getting a look at third base. So there's levels to this, and it goes a lot deeper than when you see at the surface. It is not a matter of the Pirates chose Alika Williams over Connor Griffin. It would be that the Pirates chose Alika Williams over, say, Tyler Callahan or Nick York or Nick Gonzalez as the backup shortstop, is really what it comes down to. If they are not going to have Connor Griffin as their opening day starting shortstop, it's because they feel like he needs a little more time in development, and they don't want to expose him and have to send him to the minors after a month in the majors where he struggles. That's the real part of this equation that you have to look into.
I definitely agree with that for sure.
Yeah, I have no problem him sitting, or not sitting, but getting full playing time in AAA. I mean, what he's done has been incredible, but it's been a very, very small sample size in general. There's two different questions, but I do want to ask about Don Kelly, because you've been around the Pirates for a while. You've seen Clint Hurdle, you've seen Derek Shelton, you may have seen, I don't know, John. I don't know how long you've been covering the Pirates, but
back to John Russell, Jim Tracy. I've had interactions with Chuck Tanner, and I've gotten to know Jim Leland. I didn't cover Jim Leland, but gotten to know him. So I mean, as growing up in Pittsburgh as a kid, we're going back to the Chuck Tanner days for me. And I've had a chance. I had a chance to get to know Chuck very briefly before he passed. But Don Kelly.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about Don Kelly, your impressions of him thus far, and what stands out to you compared to a lot of different other managers the Pirates have had.
Well, the first thing, and this is from talking to players, I mean, I can give you my own impressions of him, but from talking to the players, first of all, is that Don Kelly brings the passion of being a Pittsburgher who lives here, who takes pride in having played for the Pirates, been the bench coach for the Pirates, and now the manager for his hometown team. That means the world to him. This is a guy who's living it. He's living his dream right now and enjoying every second of it. So that's first and foremost for Don. The other part of it is where I think he really gets the respect is that the bench coach essentially runs spring training. They're in charge of the schedule. They're in charge of making sure everything's on time, that everything's in place. The manager's overseeing everything, but the bench coach is hands-on. And Don Kelly is so hands-on that he's the type of guy who's running in and taking, throws at first base, hitting the fungo on infield practice. I mean, he's a hands-on guy, very much involved. He's a good communicator. He communicates to the players on their level because he'd rather be honest with them because he was a player. And he's a player who, I think he said he's been DFA'd 8 or 9 times. So he knows what it's like to get bad news. He knows what it's like to have to give bad news. And I think he feels like honesty is the best policy in that regard. So what you're getting from Don Kelly is a guy who spent the majority of his 9-year career bouncing back and forth between the majors and the minors and bouncing around, all around the field. He's played every position. In fact, he did every position in one season for the Detroit Tigers one year. But he's played every position. He knows what it's like to be the 25th, or in this case, 26th man on the roster, and to know that you're there for the good vibes. You're there for the positivity. You're there for the willingness to do anything asked of you, to play any position asked of you. If that means coming in and pitching in a blowout and being the position player pitching, that means stepping in and catching even though you were a shortstop. He's done all of those things, so he can relate to every player on the team on some level, and except for maybe the superstars. But he's also a guy who's played in a World Series. He's coached in a World Series with the Houston Astros. So he's kind of seen it all and done it all at a very young age. I mean, he's still, I think, 45, 46 years old. So, this is a relatively young manager. We're not talking about a guy who's 70 and a baseball lifer. We're talking about a guy who isn't that far removed from his playing days and is still in good enough shape to go out there and run around and play with the guys and be actively involved. So all of those things matter, and then you get to know Donnie, and that's where I come in, and I can tell you the personal part of it is he's at ease. He's at ease with being in charge, maybe more so than we even expected, because he's always been a good guy. But I don't know if he's maybe quite as articulate as Derek Shelton, but he's also the type, very much like Shelty, gave a lot of insight. Gave you his thoughts on players. Was honest about them. Didn't say things just to make it a good soundbite. Give you the truth. Here's what I think about a guy. So I think he's the right man for the moment. I can tell you that one player said to me last year that they should have had him be the manager from the start last season. And the reason they didn't fire Derek Shelton, this was just the player's view, the reason they didn't fire Derek Shelton in August of 2024 was because they wanted Donnie to be the manager. And they felt like if they would have fired Shelty during the season, that they would have had to do a national search. And that would have eliminated Don Kelly, the way things worked out, that they were able to slide him in and then allow him to prove with, not quite a 500 record, but a much more respectable record than Shelty had, that Don Kelly was able to kind of earn that job. He was never given the interim tag. He was made the manager, and then he was extended as the manager. And he's a guy that has not only fully embraced that role, but is reveling in it. When you see and talk with Don Kelly about being manager of the Pirates, you see the passion come across. It means the world to him, and he treats it with that level of care and that level of respect, not only with the players, but with the public, with the media and everything. So we'll see, if he can get this team to stop the losing skids and lead them in the right path. I think it's a good thing when you have a guy like Jim Leyland as your mentor, as a guy that you can call and ask for advice. And he's going to be on. Donnie laughs. He's like, well, the one thing is when you ask Jim Leyland for advice, you better be ready for it, because he's not going to mince words. He's not going to tell you what you want to hear. He's going to tell you what the truth is and what he thinks. So you have to be prepared for that part of it. Is that it may not be what you want to hear, but it's what you need to hear. I think it's a good thing that Don Kelly's got a guy like that in his back pocket that he can call anytime he needs him.
So, do you guys have any more questions? I know you're
I'm
short on
that we
time.
can go on and on.
I just have one more final question here, because I think it's a really fascinating question. What are the Pirates? Who are the Pirates looking at as this fifth starter going into the season? Because, obviously we've heard Hunter Barco. They bring in Jose Urquidy, but Carmen Majinski, they're bringing him up to potentially start again this season, and his name has been thrown around a little bit recently. Are those kind of the names? And are the Pirates going to do a traditional 5-man rotation, do you think? Because I've also heard there could be some different maneuvering with that, because there's some uncertainty with Hunter Barco and really all the options as at that fifth starter position.
I mean, the bottom half of their rotation is all young guys. Like, I'm concerned about them having some veteran guys at the end of this rotation, and there's a lot of young guys who are super talented but unproven. Do they have enough depth too? Is another question that I'm concerned about, because I think everyone just assumes it's a guarantee that the rotation is going to be great. And yeah, you have Paul Skeens, but there's a lot of young guys in this rotation, and I was hoping they would acquire some more veteran pieces, especially from the left-handed pitcher. They really have no other lefties other than Barco.
No, and so let me answer that in a roundabout way. You mentioned the three candidates or four candidates that are up for that final spot in Mlodzinski, Urquidy, Clevenger, and Barco.
Clevenger too, yeah.
Oh, I forgot about him. Yep.
With Urquidy, looked like he had the inside track because of his history with both Don Kelly, who was the first base coach for the Astros when Urquidy broke in, and then Bill Murphy, who came from the Astros and managed, was a pitching coordinator and a pitching coach for them when he was playing for Houston. That would give him the inside track. I don't think he's had a great spring, but I don't think it's necessarily all about spring either. I think it's about, the history that you bring, whether the Pirates think you're capable of eating innings, whether they feel like that you're a guy they can trust every fifth day. So I think he's got a little bit of an inside track. Talking to the players, there's a lot of respect for Clevenger and how crafty he is and how he pitches and how he goes about his business on a day-to-day. I get the impression they like his personality, which is a little offbeat. He kind of reminds you of the Big Lebowski, kind of the dude. And he's got a good history as well. So Clevenger was a pretty talented guy before, in like Urquidy. Both these guys have dealt with some serious injury history. Mlodzinski is the wild card here because he's a guy with 7 pitches that he uses, and he's probably got a couple more that he could pull out of, that he has up his sleeve that he could pull out if he needed to. But what he's learned is, last year when he went to the minors, he learned that the splitter could be a real weapon for him, and he's starting to understand, what pitches are weapons and what pitches he needs to use, and understanding when to use them. The question mark with Carmen is whether he can get through the order a second and third time, and how deep he's going to get you into games. The other part of it is he's been much better out of the bullpen than he has as a starting pitcher, but he also didn't have that year in AAA as a starter, so he was trying to go from a minor league reliever to a major league reliever to a major league starter, which, guys have done, and he's capable of doing. He was a sandwich pick first round guy back in 2020, and that draft, say what you will about Nick Gonzalez, but the Pirates got Carmen Mlodzinski and Jared Jones in that draft too. Ben Cherington did okay there. But it's kind of the opposite when you look at Mlodzinski and Ashcraft. Ashcraft is much better as a starting pitcher than he was as a reliever. Mlodzinski's better as a reliever than he has been as a starter. I think when it comes down to is that the Pirates know long term that Hunter Barco is going to be their 5th starter. He's not ready yet. I mean, he's a guy who, when they drafted him, he had Tommy John surgery. He's been behind. He's been on pitch restrictions and limitations. He pitched 99 plus innings last year in the minors, and I think 3 innings in the majors in relief. So he's got 102 innings under his belt. You can't go from 100 to 200 innings in one season. You're going to go probably from 100 to maybe 140, maybe 150. So I think there's a part of it that they want to have a slower build-up process with Hunter Barco and have him in the minors to start the season and have him in the majors to finish the season, especially if they're going to be a contender. So I really think what it comes down to is they know Mlodzinski can always go back to the bullpen and pitch very well there, whether it's in long relief, it's as a multi-inning opener, or as a guy who could pitch in leverage situations. He's capable of doing any and all of those things. I think they know that whoever doesn't make the starting rotation can also move to a bulk relief role, which is where I think Urquidy and Clevenger are competing for that. I don't know that they keep both of them. I think it's probably one or the other because there's a 40-man roster spot involved if Clevenger makes the team. But both of them have minor league options on their contract. So because Clevenger's on a 1-year contract and Urquidy's on one with options. So I think Mlodzinski is on the pitching staff no matter what. It's just a matter of what role. I think it's probably Clevenger or Urquidy, and I think that Barco is going to be up sometime this summer. It may not be till midsummer, and then at that point, you also have to consider that Jared Jones could be coming back. But I think the two sure things you have in that rotation right now are that Paul Skeens and Mitch Keller are both guys that can eat innings, that can give you a lot of strikeouts, that can give you some serious professional pitching. Like I said, they combined for almost 40 quality starts last year. I want to say it was 38, but 38, 39, somewhere around there, out of 64. So more than half of their starts were quality combined. The Pirates have to play better when those two are on the mound. That's for sure. I mean, they were 17 and 15 in games Paul Skeens started, and he went 10 and 10. And this is a guy who gave you a sub-2 ERA back-to-back seasons. But I think both of those guys are capable of giving you 30-plus starts, 200 innings, and 200 strikeouts. And if the Pirates can get that from the top two, whether they're number 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 or whatever, Paul Skeens is clearly number 1. In fact, I think it came out today that he's going to be the opening day starter, and it was like as if there was any question.
Right.
It was a big surprise hearing that news.
Even the Pirates, yeah.
Day starter was because it was that obvious. It was not even a good question. It was like why would we ask that question? We all know who's starting against the New York Mets on March 26th. That's a no-brainer.
There was a streak there for a while. Like there was a new opening day starter like every single year. So I assume Skeens or maybe Keller broke that stretch, but Skeens. I mean, you hope for the next couple of years, but I mean, who knows with his situation, with his contract situation, once he hits arbitration, what's going to happen there?
Mm-hmm.
You guys have anything else? Anything else? Well,
let me just finish off this for the sake of your Pirates fans out there. Andy Rodriguez got optioned to AAA today. Now, that's not to say that the Pirates couldn't make a move. They very well could. I mean, they could trade Joey Barter. They could release somebody. But it looks like Henry Davis and Joey Barter are going to be your everyday catchers. They're going to probably share that role similar to what they did last year, although I think it'll probably be less 50-50 and maybe more 60-40 type of thing. You'll see Davis back there more often than Bart. It's just my guess. But I think that's a good thing for Andy Rodriguez. I think he needs to play every day, whether it's at catcher or first base or DH, and get his bat in the lineup and get him the time that he's missed over the last 2 seasons. He's only played, 18 major league games over the last 2 years. Right. So I think it's a good move. At first base, it looks like you're going to have Spencer Horwitz there. Second base will be Brandon Lau. Shortstop is the big question, whether it's going to be Nick Gonzalez or Jared Triolo, or if it's going to be Connor Griffin. I think if it's Connor Griffin, you have Triolo at third, and Nick Gonzalez can be the utility guy. If it's Triolo, whoever plays third is going to be interesting, whether it's Nick Gonzalez, which I've had people tell me they'd rather see Gonzalez at third than at short. So, there's a chance that Triolo is your shortstop and Gonzalez your third baseman. Then it comes down to who's your middle infield utility guys. Nick York and Tyler Callahan could both play the outfield. You got Jake Mangum as the fourth outfielder after with O'Hearn, Reynolds, and Cruz as your starting three. And so you look at that and say there's room for maybe a couple others. Joe Stinson Garcia may have had as good of a spring training as anybody in a Pirates uniform, but I could see him starting the season in AAA just to get him everyday play and at bats and have him ready in case there's an injury or something like that where they need to bring him up. That I think a lot of times when young guys don't make the opening day roster, it's not because they're not good enough. It's not because they didn't have a great spring. It's because they want them to play every day. And if you're not a starter, that means you're a backup, and a backup who might not play more than once or twice a week and be thrust into pinch hitting roles. And for a lot of young guys who don't play, who play every day, to have to adapt to that role of not playing regularly, they lose their rhythm. They lose their timing. And so I don't think necessarily you have to look at it and say, oh, the Pirates are crazy for having Alika Williams being their backup middle infielder over somebody. It's that he's perfectly suited for that role because he doesn't need to play every day, and he's not going to get better by playing against AAA pitching. He needs to be a guy who's in the majors. If he's going to be in the majors, he needs to be in the majors and in that role. Nobody's asking Alika Williams to be their starting shortstop on a daily basis. So that's not really the consideration. But I think there is some good things when you consider who will and won't make the team. And I'm just spitballing here, but if you have Connor Griffin, Joe Stinson Garcia, and Esmeralyn Valdez, and who was the other one I just mentioned? Hunter Barco. you could potentially have several guys that are either top 100 or just outside the top 100 prospects that are all in AAA waiting for their turn. And knowing that just a couple years ago, you had guys that were very, very fringe prospects or guys making their major league debuts who were, not quite major league material. Those were your guys that you had to call up when somebody got injured. Now you're going to be calling up guys that are potential stars. And I think that's the level of depth that the Pirates have now, is that they have a top 100 prospect who might not make the starting rotation in Barco. They have a top, not just 100, top number one overall consensus number one prospect in Connor Griffin, who might not make the opening day roster. You've got, Garcia was a top 100 prospect. You've had former top 100 prospects kind of waiting in the wings, like a Termar Johnson. That there's a lot of talent in this system. The Pirates are ranked the number one farm system in baseball by Baseball America, and there's a lot of good things happening. And I say that with Seth Hernandez is going to be a special talent as well, from everything I'm hearing about him. And he's only 19 years old and hasn't really played professional baseball yet. But the Pirates are stocked. And I think that's why this year was so important for them to go out and make the moves that they did and to support Skeens, because they know that the future is bright, but you have to give the team hope nowadays. You can't wait 2 more years, because they've just been kicking that can down the road for the past decade.
Absolutely. There's never been more talent for the Pirates under Ben Cherington since 2020 than right now. And I think there hasn't been more optimism for the team for the season than this season. And I think there's a lot of hope from Pirates fans. I think I speak for many saying we're very excited for next Thursday and for opening day, and to see what this team looks like, to see Skeens out there, and hey, potentially Connor Griffin being out there first inning against the Mets at Citi Field. I'm just throwing that out there.
He wants that so bad. Well, I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Though.
Like I said, I think he's ready. I'm sure there's a lot of, if you want to sit there and nitpick, there's a lot of things that he could do better. But from talking to the players, they would tell you, they'd kind of roll their eyes at you if they didn't think the kid was ready. They all know that he's a special talent, that he's a potential superstar here. And I think that whenever he does put on a Pirates uniform, I'll give you a little tease. He's probably not going to be wearing number 75 when he does, but whenever he does wear a Pirates uniform, I think it's going to be a really big moment, not just for the city of Pittsburgh, but I think you're going to see people come in nationally and have the buzz around that very similarly like they did with Paul Skeens, who ended up winning Rookie of the Year and then the following year the Cy Young Award. I'm not saying that Connor Griffin's going to do the same thing, go from 1 year winning Rookie of the Year, the next year being the MVP, but he has that type of talent. And having guys like Connor Griffin and Paul Skeens, who are both kind of giants in this game, both literally and figuratively, and talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates and using the words consensus and unanimous and not talking about last place is a new twist to this team, that they have the consensus number one prospect in baseball and the unanimous Cy Young winner, and they have a lot of promise, potential, and optimism that this could be a special season for them. And it's long overdue, but I also feel like it's due. It's time that the fans are ready, that the players are ready, the team is ready, and the town is ready. And I think I think it could be a fun season to cover. I'm looking forward to it. I can tell you that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. A ton of great insights and conversations about how you got started, about sports journalism, your work, and about the Pirates and the team itself. So thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. A shout out to, that's where kind of a lot of it started for me. So hope you guys have a positive experience there. And I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, well, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Episode 67, We Are Family. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to our channel again if you like our content, and follow us on our social medias. They're in our description. And we'll see you next time.